Hi, I'm Danielle Smith with the Alberta Enterprise Group. We're collaborating with Common Sense Calgary to interview candidates for the upcoming civic election in Calgary on October the 18th. And joining me now is your candidate for Ward 9, Daymond. Daymond, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Danielle.
So let's start off talking a little bit about you. What have
Mhm.
you done in your career that you think would make you a perfect counselor?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start. I guess for myself, and I'll try to do the short version, but so yeah, I started out doing an undergraduate degree in political science, and that was really driven by seeing that political science and social studies in that piece was really about serving our communities. So I just wanted to connect that. I had a passion for it. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew if I worked really hard, I was confident I could make a career of that. And actually, I guess that's something I have to give credit to my mom to.
Hmm.
Growing up in a single parent household, I learned from her work ethic, and she did everything she could to make sure that my sister and I never went without. And I think that also connects to a little bit of our background. My mom's side of the family is from Guyana, South America. So really that new Canadian perspective, people coming here to work as hard as they can to create a better future for the next generation. I think that's one of the values that was really instilled into me. And my mom was really gracious and kind, and that she gave the direction she gave to my sister and I was really, pursue your passion, make a difference, but whatever you do, give it everything you got to do the best you can. So that drove me into political science, finished my degree there, and then I got to work for the government of Alberta in a few roles, which I'll talk about more later. And then also at that point, I realized I want to get a master's degree in public policy to make sure that I can learn how to do public policy better, make sure that I have the credentials really to drive my career forward and make a difference. And then following that, for the last 3 years, well, actually, I guess I completed my degree at the School of Public Policy here in Calgary. And then I worked at the Calgary Homeless Foundation for the last 3 years. So really getting to experience that nonprofit sector and the incredible talent and innovation that happens in our city in that area. And all of that's really given me a wide lens of public policy and how to do it right, working across sectors to really make a difference. And then also my career has really been driven with a focus on serving those most in need. So working for the province, I got to work in the disability supports area, the Alberta Emergency Management Agency, and then working in the Calgary Homeless Foundation. So I would say what I really bring is that the credentials and the knowledge of public policy and how to make a difference and build relationships across levels of government, but then also that compassion to really stay focused on serving the community.
All right. Well, you're running up against an incumbent. So when you look at the
Mhm.
record of Giancarlo Corra, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Yeah, I want to give credit to him and anyone that serves our community and steps up to the plate. As I learned prior from working with elected officials, now running as one. It gives you a new perspective on things. But yeah, I appreciate all the work that he's done and what he's done to serve our community. I think the greatest concern I've heard, both from my neighbors here in Ward 9 and then also Calgarians across the city, is just seeing a gap forming between City Hall and communities. So people looking and not seeing why things are happening or what's happening. So, and that's the role that I think is incredibly important for city councilors to fill, is to really build that relationship and maintain that trust so that people know that when something's going to impact them, they can speak to their councilor, they can inform what's happening around them. And I think that's where we've seen challenges with the current city council and then our representative right now, is that we've seen it straying from what the community is calling for to then seeing ideas being pursued that are, I guess, different from what the community is asking for. And even in the really challenging thing that I've heard at the doors too, I know one man said it himself, that I've made the effort to get informed, to go to engagement sessions, but all it really feels like is a checkbox exercise. And I think that's a serious issue. And at its worst, people feel a helplessness that, no matter what they do, they can't influence what was said was going to be done is going to happen either way. So I find that incredibly challenging and also motivating to really, as my number one priority coming into the role, would really be to reconnect with community and build that trust again.
Okay, so what are the three big issues then? If there is that disconnect, what are you hearing would be your priority?
Yeah, no, that's the most important thing. And yeah, from door knocking, I would say, I guess I'll focus on three. But number one is safety. That has been a major concern. We've seen across Ward 9, which I know is a huge area, and you have different communities ranging from Inglewood and Bridgeland, so that northwest, you go all the way east to Greater Forest Lawn, and then all the way down to Ogden and Manchester too. So in each, it's a little bit different, but the number one concern is rises in theft and crime.
Hmm.
And a major concern there is related to, coming out of the pandemic, the challenge has been that a lot of people, as we talk about a K-shaped recovery, which is essentially saying that some people have been able to bounce back, some people are still struggling. So it's so important that we listen, that we help those still in need that are really struggling. And in the worst case circumstances, we see people that are struggling that have now ended up in those cycles of homelessness, addiction, and crime. So it's really important that we help our neighbors get out of that to improve the general safety and then to improve their well-being. And then a second point, again, talking about the recovery from the pandemic, is really working with small businesses. So I've got to connect with them, and it's obviously been a very challenging time. And when we talk about job growth and recovery, it has to happen with those local and those small businesses. So I think that's another major priority. And then the final point I'd raise is really the doing what I can to support unified communities. So like I mentioned earlier, challenges around engagement, but also more broadly speaking is really getting to the points of to speak against the polarization and do my part to counter that. And I think the number one thing that we can do is really shift the dialogue to debate the issues, and we can have hearty, strong-willed debates there, but then avoid going down the road of personal attacks. So I think it's so important that we have those debates, that we see different perspectives when we're making those decisions, and that we avoid getting into the personal attacks, because once we get there, it's really hard to bring people together.
Let's talk a bit about that, because when you do get elected, you are elected essentially as an independent. So you would have to be
Yeah.
able to get 7 others on board with your ideas in order to move them forward. How would you approach that? What do you think you'd do differently than what we've seen in the past?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important part of city council. Even, and one of the things I really enjoy about local government is that we don't have political parties, so you have independent people focused on serving the community, and then there's that necessity to work with others. And I mean, we've seen a little bit over the last few years, I'd say, is some of those political lines being drawn at the city level, which is unfortunate. But I think the number one thing is really connecting with people on the issues, hearing different perspectives, and then having that engagement. So building off of what we hear from community, connecting with experts from a variety of perspectives, so that we can come at it from that informed perspective with expert insights, evidence, and then the insights from community. So I think number one, our role as city councilors is to represent the voice of our community, and then do our work and our due diligence to make sure we find those best solutions. So I think on those key factors, I would rally around and connect with my counterparts.
Let's talk then about the oversight role of city administration, because a lot of initiatives are driven by the city administration, and there's a perception that the council plays a rubber stamping role. Maybe it's unfair, but what do you think? Do you think that city council needs to be more hands-on, or how do you perceive that governance role?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting debate we see in all levels of government. I know, speaking from my experience working for the government of Alberta, so I've been as a part of the administration at that provincial level, but then also working in the nonprofit sector, seeking to inform elected officials as well. So kind of having that perspective of engaging both sides and seeing it, that it is really important that we have. One, we've seen a challenge where I think the biggest thing when we talk about public policy and the current concerns, the current gap, is that the communication piece has been strained. So I think the administration, I know there's a lot of really talented professionals, people I've connected with, I've worked with, that are there to serve and make a positive difference, which I'd also say about elected officials too. They're generally with that mentality of serving to make a difference. But I think the challenge that's raised is that when you don't have that strong relationship between council and community, or councillors in their community. So I put the onus on the councillors to then improve those relationships, so we really do have a back and forth where administration can do their work with their expertise in those specific areas and bring those insights, and then councillors can communicate what their recommendations are from the administration to the community. But then the really important role of that is informing the community and then hearing from them. So I think that's the gap that's missing, that can really support better engagement and a better understanding of what administration is doing for us.
All right, let's get into some of the big picture issues when it comes to spending. So we'll start first of all with looking at the big ticket item, which is salaries, wages, benefits. And so I want to start with you. Do you think that council members are paid fairly, or do you think that there are some ways in which the compensation should be looked at to be cut?
Yeah, I think that's an important conversation, especially in this setting. I know door knocking across Ward 9, hearing from people who have had to limit their budgets, small
Mhm.
businesses that are just struggling to get by. So it's been a challenging time. And it's really important for City Council to lead by example then. So I'd say it's definitely important for City Council to look at that. And I think specifically in terms of wage, that there is an opportunity to reduce and to lead by example for the administration and for the city, that we are connected to the community. We're hearing what they're going through, and we want to respond with them and support our recovery together. So I think that's an opportunity there. And then the severance and different parts of the salary and the benefits can be reviewed as well in
All
that
right.
same, yeah.
Let me take it down one level to the
Mhm.
level of the managers and the administrators.
Yeah.
Do you think that that there needs to be some austerity on that front also?
Yeah, I think it's important. And then my priority as we go into the budget season, which will essentially be the first decisions of the city of this next city council, and then setting that 4-year strategy. So my priority is really good stewardship and providing consistency and stability for our recovery. So I think it's so important that as we look at the budgeting, that we really pursue opportunities to maintain services, and then pursue tax breaks where possible for small businesses and residential communities.
I'll talk to you a
But
little bit more about that, but I guess I'm just
okay,
wondering about the compensation level and the pensions that are given to managers. Do you
yeah,
think that there's anything that needs to be looked at there?
yeah. So I wouldn't want to not answer your question. Yeah, so that is the next point. So in that broader scheme of looking at what we can do, I think that's an opportunity as well. Again, council leading by example, and then taking a careful look at what we can do to manage, to look at salaries and benefits, and to work with administration to find areas where we can reduce and find efficiency, and ultimately to better serve the community.
Do you have an approach that you would take to collective bargaining? So we'll go down to the sort of the frontline
Mhm,
layer now, because oftentimes when a collective agreement is signed, it's multi-year, and sometimes it's a bit
mhm.
out of step with what's happening in the general economy and what taxpayers are experiencing. Do you think that there needs to be any wage rollbacks or any austerity when it comes to reducing the number of employees, or do you think that that is an area that's working just fine?
Yeah, I think we're in a really unique position coming out of the pandemic when the administration scaled down, and now we're scaling up, and so now it's for us to reassess the needs and really look at what the community needs in terms of services and provision to really scale up again. So we are in a unique opportunity where I think we are well positioned to review what's going on and really see where we can find efficiencies and where there is a need for administration and to get the right support to ultimately make sure that we get the right services done. I know, and even in my experience working with the Alberta Management Agency, it was such a unique setting that when an emergency happens, we need to scale up. And then when there aren't emergencies, we're just preparing, so we scale down. So even just learning from that experience of being flexible in terms of our arrangements and even what we commit in terms of salaried positions and contract positions. So I think there's opportunities to review those factors as we prepare for what is, I know a lot of people are saying, a new normal.
All right. So generally speaking, do you think that the level of spending is about right? Or do you think it's too much? Or do you think it's too little?
Yeah, I know. Fortunately, I have a friend of mine who's actually does analysis of municipal financial circumstances. So I was able to connect with him and had a good conversation
Oh,
about the city's current standings. And I think on an operational level, they've done a decent job of keeping things balanced and pretty well. I think we've overspent a bit on the capital side, which then
mm.
relates to then deficits and debts that we do need to work with over the years. So I think doing what we can to really maintain an operational balance and then being more intentional and reducing the number of capital projects that we take on, especially at this time during a pandemic.
Okay. I'll talk to you a bit more about capital, but I don't want to leave the issue of taxes. What are you hearing
Mhm.
about taxes at the door? Again, about right? Too high or too little?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, it's often too much, right? That's what we hear at the doors. But I think more than anything, I've heard people that have, yeah, their concerns, they're informed. They have shared that what we've seen is consistent rises in property tax, which then don't
Mhm.
align with the services that they feel they're receiving. And then also, as we look at the business community, where the longstanding issues of taxation in the corporate sector that have really been revealed as a result of the economic downturn. So I
Mhm.
think doing what we can to review what we can do in terms of reducing taxes, especially coming out of this pandemic. And again, what I was talking about was providing that stability coming out of the pandemic. So having a 4-year plan that's consistent and predictable. So in terms of reductions, doing what we can, not to just do one big one this year and then have another increase coming next year, but planning over a 4-year cycle. Can we offer reductions over the next few years, so that people have stability, can plan when they're reopening their business, starting a new business, and even homeowners when they're purchasing and planning out their financial situations as well.
Okay, so let's talk about capital for a minute, because of course, when you're talking about overspending, the first thing that comes to mind is the Green Line, which had a lot of support when
Yeah.
it was first introduced, but it was also a different project. It was going to be 40 kilometers, go to the deep south and the deep north,
Mhm.
and have a multi-party buy-in so that everybody took a third of it. Now it's half the project, doesn't go either north nor south, and I don't know if that there's a plan or even that it's been expensed out to figure out how much that's going to cost. So tell me your general view about the Green Line. Do you have a proposal for how it could proceed in a
Mhm.
way that fixes the project, or do you think it should be discarded? What's your sense of it?
No, that's a big question. That's an important question too, as we're talking about the Green Line. So I support the Green Line. I support public transit and doing what we can to expand. I know we've seen great examples of it, even in the Max Purple, so the rapid transit route coming on 17th Avenue, close to where I live. But so I support the support public transit. This specific project obviously has had a lot of concerns, and there was very ambitious versions at the start going through downtown. So I'm glad that it has taken a really thorough analysis at this point and being really realistic with the expenses, because we know these major infrastructure projects, they can go over very quickly. So I appreciate the opportunity in it that we have federal and provincial dollars coming in, billions of dollars. So I support that. I'm glad that we have a deal done so we can start building the project. I appreciate the opportunity that we can add to it as financially capable. Because so number one, yeah, getting it built, supporting more jobs and getting this investment from provincial and federal governments is really important. But then as we go forward, really making an intentional piece to understand the ridership and what the operational cost will be for the city, so that we can carefully consider our next steps. And ideally for me, what I'd really like to see is connecting to the South Health campus, because really having the train line that goes to some of these really critical places that can mean better health services, better connection to different parts of the city. So I think that's an important piece, obviously being fiscally responsible and taking it step by step.
All right, let's talk about the other capital projects that were approved. The Event Center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion, the Arts Commons transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. When the city voted to approve these projects, they did so against the advice of the city CFO, who said that they couldn't afford all of them. So let me
Mhm.
sort of put you in the shoes of having to make that decision. Of those four projects I mentioned, what one or two of them would have been your priority if you'd only been able to choose one or two?
Yeah, I think in prioritizing is the key. When we're looking at these capital projects, there's a need for each of them, but really, I would say this responsibility of council is to make those hard decisions and really factor it in. So yeah, if I had to pick one or two, I would be aiming. I would go for. I would support the arena first. I think there's a great opportunity with that, and then also I would say actually the Arts Commons as well. I would support, and they both connect to the same line of thought. So I've actually had the opportunity to connect with a lot of young adults and youth in Calgary, and a lot of them have concerns when they look to the future and think about, do I see my future in Calgary? And number one is the jobs piece. So obviously we need to do our part to help that recovery. But another major factor for them and many Calgarians too is looking at our arts and culture. So we know Calgary is a growing city. I know it's the third most diverse city in Canada. So there's an opportunity to really come here and enjoy, but we are competing with other major cities like Vancouver and Toronto. And it's important that we do have an arts and cultural spaces in the larger sense of things to have these major events. So like the Saddle Dome right now, we're missing out on a lot of major concerts that attract people from all ages to come to Calgary to visit the state. So doing what we can to invest in those spaces, not to mention the NHL and all the fans that come there. So I think those two are really important as we talk about supporting our arts and cultural sector, and then continuing to make Calgary a place where people want to live.
All right, let's talk a little bit about another aspect of spending, but infrastructure spending, but on the private side, development and housing. So first of all, let's talk a bit about affordable housing. And when I say that, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's steering right into my wheelhouse a bit. I know working at the Calgary Homeless Foundation, a part that I really enjoyed was one, learning about the social services side, but also learning about the housing sector and how we can affect change in that area. So when we say affordable housing, I do think of the spectrum of things. So number one, there's affordable housing with supports, so those supporting those in greatest need, whether they're just leaving homelessness or they're at risk of. So having housing with supports is a piece of the puzzle. And as we move forward, there's just affordable housing so that people can avoid becoming homeless and experiencing that just based on the financial realities of it. And which is also a major contributor to homelessness, which isn't always considered, that people think it's whether people have a mental health issue, physical health, or addiction, but it's actually a lot of people in financial situations. And I know Calgary is uniquely positioned that we have had in the booms and bust cycle, that we overbuild on the higher end of the rental market. And then on the lower, and then during the bust time, we don't build anything. So it's become that we have an oversupply of high-end housing rentals, and then also that impacts the rental space. But then the final point that I'll talk to, and that's about the spectrum of things, is that affordable home ownership as well, because we really do want to support people as they continue through the spectrum of going from renter or supported housing, renting, and then ownership. So I think it's important that we really take that broad approach and appreciate that there's different levels to this.
Oh, truly. The guidebook for great communities, I think, is an aim to address all of those issues, but it met with some controversy when it was being debated. Do your constituents have any concerns? Do you have any concerns?
Yes, yeah, there are. I would emphasize what I've heard in community, and there are a lot of major concerns, and in some cases, it's become quite a divisive issue, even just within certain communities. But for the large part, what I'm really hearing is support for the Main Street approach and having more affordable housing and services and accessibility is a good thing. But when we get to the conversation about density and where it goes, that's the sticking points. And unfortunately, I know even the current council acknowledged that it's unfortunate that it got so political. That the guidebook got so political. It's meant to be a guiding document, and I'm glad that was clarified, that it's not legislated and not mandatory. But I think it's connected to that larger issue of trust. And the major concern, and I've heard this across Ward 9, whether we're in the Northwest or in Ogden, and I guess the one thing I'll mention on that too is that there's also the local area planning and finalizing those documents, which adds fuel to the fire in this situation, because those documents haven't been finalized, specifically in Inglewood and Ramsey, and then also in Ogden. That they came to those engagements and they've largely stalled. And then now we have one-off projects coming through, which now seem to be propelled by the guidebook, which has been a major concern. So it all comes back to the individuals. So people that, whether they're renters or homeowners, just being able to influence what happens around them. And it's such a basic kind of a human feeling too, we don't want anyone to have that powerless feeling and to lose hope. Obviously in the context of a pandemic, it's been really challenging, and the mental health side of things of that, but also just in city planning and being able to impact change in your community. So I think it's so important that we rebuild trust. And I think a priority for me will be those local area plans. So bringing community back to the table, reviewing how we're doing engagement, working with administration as well as city council, but really reviewing how we can review engagement, have a meaningful process that's consistent, and to ultimately build that trust back in community.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about building the economy, because Alberta's had a hard time since 2014. Calgary in particular, with the downtown, has had a difficult time keeping those spaces full, as you mentioned earlier. Well, what's your thought on how to revitalize downtown?
Yeah, well, I think I'm glad that this has gotten so much attention, that we are really focused on this issue, because it is so important. And we're addressing a long-standing issue, which was how our downtown was designed, and it was largely built around corporations and corporate ownership of the land. So we are kind of reviewing it, building something that will be longer lasting, more sustainable, which is a good thing. I think it's great that we're doing what we can to add more housing and to look for opportunities to be innovative and to create more spaces that fit the needs of a variety of sectors. And then that kind of pulls me to the next point, which when we talk about our economic recovery and building, a bigger, brighter future, is really around that diversifying our economy. I'm glad to see the great work of Calgary Economic Development and even the University of Calgary and different groups like that to really inspire and build up Calgary's downtown, and as well as Calgary as a city, to really have new sectors that can thrive and grow. So I think it's so important that we continue to diversify our economy to then help fill the vacancy in downtown, while kind of rethinking how we plan it, how we build it. But then also, and kind of to close off, is not to forget that we do have incredibly talented people in our energy sector that are doing great innovative work, even around carbon capture. and those different aspects that can support our response to climate change and to support our environmental stewardship. So I think there's a great opportunity to build on the existing talent in that energy sector, and it's been encouraging to see their innovation while also continuing to diversify and grow other sectors.
All right. You mentioned Calgary Economic Development. So they were given $100 million. I don't think they've spent all of it, but the type of approach is giving direct dollars to attract businesses. Do you think that's the best approach for bringing businesses to Calgary, or do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, well, I think from bringing it from the city's perspective, first and foremost, I think the priority of the city should really be creating a competitive environment. Like that should be the ideal point. And I know jurisdictionally, I know the provincial, federal governments have a lot more power in this area, but I think our priority at the city level is to do what we can to, one, create a competitive environment for businesses to thrive and for business to look in and be and consider moving here. And then also to really listen to their needs and be a voice. Because I think that's one of the great things about local government is that we are the closest to the businesses and the people. So it's really important that we do what we can to connect with them, gather the data, and tell the story to the other levels of government to really encourage them, one, to identify what our needs are, and then work with them to identify what can really create the most impact. So yeah, generally speaking, I think that's where we should focus, is creating a competitive environment opposed to trying to choose winners. In this circumstance, I'm comforted by the fact that it's Calgary Economic Development that's doing more of that piece to really identify the growing sectors and the areas for growth. So I think that connects into the importance of partnership. So really connecting with the leaders in the sector to help them guide our policies going forward.
Okay, there's a range of issues that came up in the last year. So I just want to quickly run some of these by you to see what your thoughts are on them. So first of all, let me talk a bit about the defund the police movement. What did that mean to you, and what lessons should we take from what is being asked for there?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to take from that is listening to the concerns and what's happened and what has sparked such a strong response from the community. So acknowledging that and taking that into account, and then using this opportunity to really affect change in a positive way. I think from a public policy perspective, we know that it is really a mix of what's happening now and political will, and then also the capacity of the administration to really affect change. So this does present a really unique opportunity for us to review how we do policing and define areas for improvement. I don't support the simple statement of defunding the police. I support the opportunity to sustain their funding and then work with them to help fund other areas. And I had a really great conversation with a police officer who just recently retired, actually. So he has a breadth of knowledge. And what he really pointed out to, what he's seen over the last 30, 40 years, is really that as other social services and other areas had reduced funding, reduced capacity, it all fell onto the police. So by law, they're required to respond. So that's been the real challenge, is that police have had to do too much, that too many responsibilities have been essentially left to them based off not enough funding or enough staffing in other areas. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to look at what police do and what they probably shouldn't be doing. And that involves connecting with them, because I know we've had our chief, Newfield, who's really spoken into that too. He's supportive of that, of the adaptation and finding opportunities to work with other partners. So I think that's the opportunity that we need to take in this conversation.
All right. So another aspect of policing, which actually is going to increase the workload, is the decision to reduce the speed limits in residential communities from 50 kilometers per hour down to 40 kilometers per hour. Some wanted it to go to 30 kilometers per hour. What did you think needed to be done there?
Yeah, I think there's some challenges with that. So I think as we talk about, I think that conversation is really sparked around public safety and saving lives, which is an incredibly important conversation to have and for us to take very seriously. I know connecting with people across Ward 9, there's been concern. Just hearing about those local areas, yeah, people are speeding down the street. We have kids riding their bikes. Like, this is a serious concern. So I appreciate that is incredibly important, that we look at our opportunities to increase safety. I think the step to reduce to 40, it offers some benefits in terms of encouraging people to reduce their speeds. But the reality is that to get the greatest impact, then we need to have people out ticketing all the time to actually change people's habits and behaviors. And I don't think that's an ideal situation. So I think moving forward, what I really want to focus on is then narrowing in on those specific troublesome areas and doing what we can in terms of road design. So we're adding speed bumps, whether we're adding lights and pylons and that piece. So really looking at the design of our streets to improve safety opposed to just changing the speed limit.
All right, let's talk a bit about public-private partnerships, or the role of private
Mm-hmm.
sector in delivering public services. Two contexts it's come up in,
Mm-hmm.
context of the privatization of golf courses, and the other was in partial privatization of garbage collection. So generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking, are you supportive of that approach?
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, I am supportive. I know from my experience, I got working for the province in disability supports. What we did there is that we had an initiative that started, and there was so it was in the area of FASD, so fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, so helping people in those circumstances. But the approach that I really appreciated that the province took was having community-led networks and organizations formed, and then they connect into the province and they provide direction, listen to those on the grounds doing the work to ultimately support efficiency and finding the best solutions. So I appreciate that opportunity to really to I guess put the work out to other areas and really listen to the needs on the ground. So I think as we specifically bring it into this context is the opportunity for the city to provide basic level services, but then also to scale up with partnerships in the private sector. And obviously the efficiencies that come with that. And then also just the efficiency of having two groups. So we have a context of how efficient can it be and what are the best practices. So that just leaves more room for innovation, which ultimately serves us better.
All right. Two other areas of
Mm-hmm.
government service that I want to run by you to see if you think that they're going well or if they need to be changed. One,
Mm-hmm.
snow removal. I know we're a little bit further away from snow removal, but there were a lot of concerns about, especially in the cul-de-sacs, not having efficient snow removal in the residential communities during the last big dump. Were you hearing anything about that? And do you think that that needs to be approached differently?
Yeah, I know. I mean, the time of the election might be impacting this, but yeah, I'm not hearing too much about that now. But I did hear some really serious concerns. I know about one man who has a health condition, and he
Mm.
has in front of his home designated parking for himself based on his condition. And the concern was that that space wasn't being cleared, and that there was a
Mm.
giant hill that would form. And even one time he needed an ambulance, but the ambulance couldn't come right next to the curb. So I think there are serious health concerns in terms of snow removal, so really targeting to make sure that we do what we can to keep people safe. But then again, speaking to scaling things out, I think it's important that, I guess, yeah, again, speaking to my experience around the Emergency Management Agency, just seeing how organizations can scale up, scale down. Snow removal, we can't predict it that well. So I think, well, we can predict it fairly well. But I think the number one thing is to have the staff to do those major roads, but then also have the capacity to contract out to hire people in those peak times, opposed to having people just waiting for a lot of snow to fall.
All right. Other program, Public Art, that has caused some controversy.
Yeah.
We think of the Big Blue Ring, the Beaufort Towers, there's a couple of others. Do you think that they've fixed the problems with that program, or would you approach that one differently too?
Yeah, I appreciate the number one thing, and I've heard this quite a bit at the doors actually, which is interesting. That exactly the examples you alluded to was that when we see these art projects, one going outside of the country, going internationally, that's a major concern. So number one, I appreciate that we've refocused and then supporting local artists, and I think just doing everything we can to continue to bring that, move that forward as a really practical outcome of our arts program, our public art program, to really support those local artists where possible, Canadian artists at least. So I think that's a step in the right direction. And again, as we look at the budget and the financial piece, it's again making those tough decisions, prioritizing. I believe there's a place for public art. It makes a difference how a place looks and feels. But then again, we do need to prioritize.
Okay, last couple of questions I have for you are related to your role as an elected council member. So there is going to be a referendum in the fall on a couple of them, actually, daylight savings, equalization, and fluoride. Just generally speaking, how do you feel the tool of referendum or plebiscite should be used? Do you tend to favor it, or do you think that your role as an elected representative is to make most of the decisions or all of the decisions yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I know even from studying at the School of Public Policy, so learning about policy issues and how we can approach them. So that's a really important conversation too, is as how much do we have government officials making decisions, or sorry, elected officials making decisions, and then turning it to the public. So I think I believe there is a time and place for turning things to the public. And as we look at the fluoride discussion, that one has we know we have our own history here in Calgary about plebiscites going either way, and it's an issue that is really I wouldn't not divisive, but it's very closely contested whether people support it or not. So I think that is a good example of where and it's also not time sensitive in that we don't need to make an immediate decision. So that's a great opportunity to turn it over to the polls. And obviously having an election helps out with that process as well. So I do believe there is a time and place for plebiscites, but also, or I guess referendums. And the most important thing, but then when we're thinking about other policies that are more time sensitive, that it is the role of the elected officials to listen to their community and then and make those decisions.
All right. It's a good way of separating the two. So let me ask you about that last point that you raised, because sometimes you will have a situation or a policy come forward where the administration is recommending one course of action, but your constituents want you to vote the other way. What would you do in those circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important question. It kind of makes me laugh a bit. I had a meeting with the community association, and they very articulately crafted me into a corner where they asked essentially that question. So it was a great job for them. But then I'll stand on where I stood there, is that it's my role to represent my community. So I'll do what I can. If I listen to the administration, I think they make a compelling point. I'll do what I can to communicate to my community and ideally build understanding and go from there. But number one, my responsibility is to represent the voice of the community. So I would share what I've heard and then vote accordingly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. Just so people know where they can find you, what's the easiest way to do it? Is it to find you on a website or on Facebook?
Yeah, a couple options. Number one, if you go to daymondcan.ca, so you'll find my website there, and then there's links to my social media. I also have a Facebook page as well, so Daymond Can for Ward 9. But yeah, if you go to the website, that'll connect with everything you need, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Once again, thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle.
You got it. That is Daymond Can, who is your candidate for Ward 9.